Hi everybody, it's Stephen Brooke and welcome to Architectural Photography and Composition. You know, what we do as architectural photographers is we're taking the three-dimensional world and we are converting it into a two-dimensional medium, and we're losing the sense of depth, which is why it's really important that we try to create as much depth as possible in our photography. And I want to go over a number of techniques that will help you to create a sense of depth in your images. These are the elements we're going to look at. We've looked at some of these before in other contexts, but I want to put them in the context of creating depth in the image, and that is the use of border verticals, foreground entrances, overlapping elements, receding rhythm, and atmospheric perspective. So let's start with what we've talked about before. We looked at this with streetscapes, we looked at this with a variety of things, but I want to show you how border verticals help create the sense of depth in our images. This is Poussin's painting in 1650. He's got a full height vertical here. He's got part of the foreground is in shadow and another vertical over here. And what that does, it creates a frame into which the architecture now sits. So this is one layer back here, and then here's yet another layer, and the architecture sits in the back, rather than it all being in one flat plane. So I use this technique in the Bass Museum. I have a full height vertical, this tree. I have part of my foreground is in shadow, and I have another vertical over here. First of all, it keeps your eye from going off the frame, which is really important. Whatever you do, you want to keep your viewer's eye on your photograph. You want to keep them riveted to what you're doing. And setting up these border verticals helps set up a frame, helps set up an environment into which now the architecture sits further back. Edward Hopper uses this on his interiors. Here's a vertical here, full height vertical. This part of this window ledge is in shadow, and even we talked about this once before, that part of the spinet is blocking your eye from leaving the frame because she's looking down at the piano. But notice the full height vertical frames what's going on here. He's sitting here, here's the table, here she is, behind them is the door. So there are these layers that go on, and what starts the layering is the use of these full height verticals. And I've done this at Leon Medical. Here's my vertical here. Here's one over here, and it keeps your eye on the picture plane. I've done a lot here to create depth. I have just the tops of these chairs, then the next layer of chairs, then what goes on back here. I've done something else with these columns that we're going to talk about in a minute. The next thing is to create a foreground entrance. We looked at this when we looked at Cezanne in landscape, and one of the things that Cezanne always does is he gives you a way into his painting, and that entrance also gives a wonderful sense of depth. And I've done that here in my photograph in Puerto Rico. Here's my little area coming in this way, and it takes you into the image where actually the architecture back here is what I'm really after, but I've set up all these other elements to create this sense of depth in my photograph. The next thing is overlapping elements, and again we talked about that with interiors, that when items overlap one another you get a sense of depth. When they're separated, depending on where they are, you get a sense of depth. But if they are tangential, if they're just touching, it might destroy that sense of depth. This is one of Vermeer's paintings. Vermeer has a tremendous amount of depth in this painting, and if you look and see how he does it, notice every element overlaps every other element. Nothing is tangential. If you look at the The drape here covers her horn. Her hand covers the horn. She's in front of the tapestry back here. It goes on here. He's in front of his hand. His hand is in front of the where he is drawing. This is in front of the easel. The easel is in front of the tapestry again. And all of these elements, it's just a symphony of elements taking you from the foreground all the way to the back of the painting. And I've done that here in this interior. I've set up my big vertical here, but when I arrange my furniture and arrange my elements, what I'm doing is I'm trying to create depth. I'm setting the pieces here just so that it just clips. For example, here, the column comes behind the chair, but this chair comes in front of the break front. This one is very much in front. And then this little still life over here, this table sits in front of the couch, which sits in front of the column. The flowers, I've separated the flowers from this column, and then they sit in front of this drape. These all sit in front of the bed, and it goes on and on and on to give a sense of depth to the overall image. Emphasize receding elements to create rhythm, and this is really powerful thing to do. This is a book cover by Chernikov, who was a constructivist. Notice how his big vertical elements got smaller and smaller and smaller, and so he has these elements receding in his drawing, and it gives a wonderful sense of depth. So how does that work in real life? So I've done this out at Miami International Airport. These big forms recede, go back, go back, go back. The columns recede. And again, it draws your eye deeper and deeper into the photograph. And it also keeps your eye on the photograph. You don't get to go out. You get to go right where I want you to go. And I do that by these repeating elements. Here's another one at the New Orleans pumping station. You start out here, and then I move you further and back, further back, further back, as all of these repeating structures go, and I finally get you back here. Here's another one at the Broward County, at the sewage treatment plant. I'm right up against these bolts, and then I let this pipe and these pipes all carry you all the way to the back of the image. And also at the Lido Island, I have two sets of repeating elements, these, and just the tops of these little cabanas. The next thing is to make use of atmospheric perspective, and there are two aspects of this. One is the diffused background, the diffused light, and the other is the fact that red and yellow advance towards your eye, and blues and greens tend to recede. And if you think about that when you're setting up your photograph, you can take advantage of that. Let's see how we looked at Caspar David Friedrich's Wanderer Above the Mist. This is in pretty sharp focus. He's in sharp focus. As you go further back into the painting, things get more and more diffused, drawing your eye further back. And that's what he wants you to do, because in this painting, he is asking you to think about the wanderer contemplating the glories of the landscape, the glories of the universe, and he draws you further and further back, and it gets more and more diffuse back there. Leonardo takes advantage of blues and greens receding in the Ginevra de Benci. She's really warm tone. Everything here is warm tone. But look what happens as you go further back. These blues and greens recede, giving even more depth. Now this is a reproduction. This is the only Leonardo in the Western Hemisphere, and you can go to the National Gallery in Washington, D.C. and see her. And it's almost worth a trip to Washington to see this absolutely magnificent painting. So here in Assisi, I've taken advantage of this really diffuse background light. So your eye just goes and goes and goes. Now I kept a dark area over here because I don't want you going off here. I do want you staying within the confines of my photograph. Here's another one in Florence. I have diffused light back here. And also I've got blues and greens that go back further. Here are the warmer tones that come towards your eye. And here, this is again back in Puerto Rico. I have some repetition of form here, but what really gives this depth, here's my little entrance, here's my vertical, here's my vertical. What really gives it depth is I have these blue-green tones way back in the mountains that set it much further back than if it weren't blue and green. And this is a summary of this. I have a foreground entrance here. I have blues and greens, atmospheric perspective. I have a border vertical here, and I have overlapping elements in the foreground. This overlaps this overlaps this overlaps that, to again create as much of a sense of depth as I can by using all of these elements. Now, there are some things you don't want to do, and the reason you don't want to do them is it destroys the sense of depth. One of the things that will wreck it is if you call the viewer's attention to the actual frame. We don't want to think about the frame. That just contains our photograph. But look what happens if you do something like this. If you terminate a structure right at the border, now you're calling my eye right up to here. Sense of depth is gone. Now I'm looking at a two-dimensional object. I don't want that. I want to give the illusion of 3 dimensions. I can't do that if I'm touching the border. Give it plenty of room so that you have a this works. You're not calling the viewer's attention to the picture plane. If you have a diagonal and you terminate it in the corner, the same thing happens. You're calling your viewer's attention to the frame. That's the last thing in the world you want them to look at. This is at the New York Public Library. This is what happens when you and I see people do this. You terminate the diagonal right in the corner. That's static, and it also defeats a sense of depth we're trying to make. So look, either come short or break through the top, and now you get a much better sense of depth than you do when you pin it at the corner. And don't put the corner of the building right in the middle. Now my eye is fixated here, and you're not giving me a chance to go anywhere. You're just hitting me with the corner of the building, and now my eye is frozen there. So that's another thing you want to avoid. And avoiding elements that touch where they shouldn't. I want you just to look in this one area. I would like this tree, which sits in front of my building, I would like it to really sit in front and have a sense of depth. But look, I've got some palm fronds here that are touching my building, that are touching the tree. Look what happens when I get rid of them. Bam! Now this tree really sits in front of the building, whereas before it didn't. It frees that whole area up again to give me another little element of depth. And the totality of all of this, when you create all of these levels of depth, it gives real interest and dynamism to your photograph. So here are the elements to think about when you're setting up your photo. 1, border verticals. 2, a foreground entrance. 3, overlapping elements. 4, receding rhythm. And 5, atmospheric perspective. So if this makes sense to you, you think this will help you, give it a thumbs up. If you're new to the channel, please subscribe. We have a great community. The comments that come through are really helpful, and you will join a community of professional and amateur photographers who are all really interested, passionately interested in architectural photography and landscape and interiors. If you would like, this channel is free, and it's always been free and always will be free. But if you would like to support the channel and get something really valuable, consider purchasing a copy of my Architectural Photography and Composition. It's available as an ebook, and it's available on Amazon now as a in printed form. This has everything you're going to need. If you're starting out, you don't need to look anywhere else. Everything that you need to get a foothold with this field is in this book. If you are just starting out, or if you're a seasoned photographer thinking about doing architectural photography in addition to what you're normally doing, I highly recommend this book. The other way you can get this information, if you would prefer it presented to you in a step-by-step fashion, is we have a Udemy course, an online course that has 46 episodes. We go through everything, and it's a nice orderly way to take you through everything that you need. We've thought a lot about what we put in. We also thought about the sequence of the lessons so that one builds on another, on another, another. And I guarantee if you go through this course, you will come out of it with a confidence in being able to do this work at a professional level. You'll get better at it the more you do it, but you will have a great start. So either the ebook or the course will really give you a leg up on your architectural photography. So thank you all very much for watching, and I look forward to seeing you again soon.